Welcome to the Drilldown, in-depth answers to oilfield questions. I'm Richard Spears.
And I'm John Spears.
And I don't know what you do on your way to the office.
Yeah.
But I live a little further away than you do.
That's true.
And periodically, in fact, once every 6 months or so,
Yeah.
I'll take the super long way to the office, and I will swing through West Tulsa.
Okay. Yep.
And I will drive by a privately owned oilfield service company manufacturer.
Right.
Who's out there in West Tulsa. And
Yep.
my job, or what I'll do is I will park on the hill outside the company. They're on both sides of the road.
Sure.
And I'll count the cars in the parking lot.
Because
for the last several years, I've been interested in how many people go to work at this very private and very well-respected oilfield manufacturing company.
Right.
Because here's what we learned. Every once in a while, that company will make some public announcement, or it will be written up in one of the Tulsa newspapers.
Sure.
Oh, wait, we only have one.
Yeah.
But and they'll give a clue about how well they did the prior year.
Right. Oh, absolutely. Right.
So if I know how many cars are parked in the parking lot that year, then I've kind of got an idea or a reference point that says, 100
More,
cars in the parking
less,
lot,
right.
$10 million worth of revenue.
So this gets to the larger point that people often ask us, which is, how do you guys go about doing your market research, right? And specifically, I think we should talk about how we do our work, gather the information for the report that we produce called our Oilfield Market Report, which we've labeled OMR. I just wish a long time ago when we first thought of the name that we copyrighted OMG. Think about all the money we could get in there, right?
All those teenage girls would owe us money every time.
Yeah, so the Oilfield Market Report. So
how it's made, the Oilfield Market Report, because I don't know what year this is now for it, but it might be the 25th edition.
Oh, yeah, right.
And it's updated every quarter, so you sort of lose track of what it is.
So,
but on October 1st, we'll have let's call it the 25th edition comes out.
Mm-hmm.
David Ott and his colleague Missy Parker are working hard on this thing to figure it out.
Right.
But in the OMR, we track several hundred, so 500 or 600 oilfield service companies around the world by product line over time.
So we're looking at their revenues in 32 different segments, I think is what we shoot to do. Right.
Yeah, and a market segment is hydraulic fracturing. A market segment is directional drilling or supply vessels.
Yeah, so actually then the point I would say is the very first step in that whole process is defining what a market segment is, right? Because one of the things we found is that all these companies, not all of them, but will want to define the market segment that most closely describes the product or the services that they offer. And so you get 10 different companies in there, and they'll have 10 different ways of saying, well, this is what I mean when I talk about completion equipment or something like that, right?
Yeah. Is completion equipment a packer? Is it a liner hanger?
Right.
Is it the intelligent well completion that they've got?
Yeah.
Is it a centralizer? What is it?
How far you go, right?
So one of the things we did, 25 years ago, the whole reason why we started doing the OMR is because FMC came to us and said, would you take a look at these 10 market segments?
Right.
I forget what the 10 were.
Right. Tell us how big they are and tell us who's in it and what shares they have.
It was just a snapshot, and they wanted to do the snapshot each year.
Yes.
So the 10 market segments, and wouldn't you know it, one of the product lines was a product line of Schlumberger.
Right. Okay. So they were another competitor in that space. Yeah.
Yep.
Gotcha.
So we, if I remember right, so we said, all right, maybe let's call it drill bits.
Sure.
So Schlumberger wasn't in drill bits, but let's pretend that they were at the time. But it was Smith at the time.
Yeah.
And they said, so to describe the drill bit market. So the very first thing we did was we figured out broadly who were the two biggest companies in that market segment.
Right.
We're going to use what those guys consider to be inside the drill bit market.
This is their definition of.
Or if you're a directional driller, what do you call directional drilling?
Yes, right.
And very quickly, like with directional drilling, we discovered at that time that logging while drilling was not considered part of directional drilling.
Yes.
So it was its own market segment. It still is its own market segment. So step one was figure out what's in and what's not in that market segment. Generally,
like being an umpire, what's a ball, what's a strike?
Yeah, it's in a zone. But I'm the one who determines what the zone is.
Yes, right.
It's a little bit subjective.
The pitcher would perhaps have a different definition. The batter would have a different definition. You get to be the umpire.
They sometimes argue. Sometimes. But in this particular case, we tended to take the definition of a market segment based upon the leader in that segment, and then we went from there.
Right. Okay.
So there'll be, but the problem is this: there's 100 of these companies are public.
Yes,
so
right. Yeah, right.
All the time we go.
So which is good and bad. They will disclose their revenues. They have to. They may not disclose them at the product or service line level like we would love them to do.
Like they used to do.
Yeah, right. So the public information, there's a certain amount of information out there from the public companies, but the private guys, that's a whole nother ballgame, and that's where we have to get inventive and sometimes look at employee counts or estimate employee counts.
Because there's ratios that are common, whether you're public or private.
Sure, a ratio would be...
like for example, a very common ratio we use is if you see somebody working for an oilfield service company, they've got 10 employees. A pretty good ratio is $325,000 per year per employee. Maybe it's 375 during a good year.
Right.
But generally, tell me how many people you've got working for you.
And now we've got
I'm going to multiply that times my magic ratio.
Sure.
And then I'm going to have a zip code in which that's probably the revenues associated with that company.
Yeah, I got you. This is a starting point anyway. So you can quickly do a sort that says big, little, medium size, something like that from a company size standpoint.
If you're, as you're listening to this, you could pause this podcast right now and go look at the Schlumberger earnings.
Yes.
And you'll see, for example, that Schlumberger releases, I think, 3 revenue buckets.
Okay, right.
A drilling sort of revenue bucket, a production revenue bucket, and a Cameron revenue bucket.
Yes, right.
Schlumberger's got 20 or 25 product lines.
In the work that we do, we give them credit for 20 or 25 product lines. Yes, right.
Yeah, in their own internal numbers, I'm sure it's 200 product lines.
Okay, but so how do we handle a multi-divisional company with limited, specific information?
Yeah, because also remember that if it's a U.S. public company, has kind of the same rules of global public companies. I don't care where you're headquartered.
Sure.
And there's rules against saying something as an executive, corporate executive, that is material but non-public.
Yeah, right. Absolutely.
And how about this? It would be if Schlumberger's CEO can't say, oh, by the way, our drill bit revenue is X.
Yeah, right.
If he just says that to say you, because that's material and it's not public.
Yeah, sure, right.
So he can't say that.
Yeah.
And his presidents and his regional presidents, they can't say that either.
Yeah.
Because it's so we have a 3-step process.
Yeah. Which, by the way, we have a 3-step process because those companies follow that. We're not getting any.
And we don't violate it.
Yeah.
I mean, we have our internal. We make everybody in our firm sign this little document every year that says, I will not ask for, and I will also not receive anything that's material non-public.
So we get to be, clever. So what's the 3-step process?
We have to be clever. So step 1, we take the easy step first.
Okay.
The easy step first is like a company like FTSI or Liberty.
Okay, right.
Public company.
Yeah.
1 or 2 product lines, and guess what? Every quarter they give you those numbers.
Sure. Okay.
So
low-hanging fruit, as it were.
It is
for us.
Because we're going to go look and we're going to go write that down. Because if FTSI says their frac revenues were $100 million, we write that down.
Sure.
If Liberty says that, we're going to write that down. And so that establishes a benchmark for a market-leading or regional one product line service company that if you track that over time, you know that's an indicator or a barometer or a thermostat for how, a barometer for how the industry's doing in that area. So that's step 1. The other easy step we take is sometimes the owner of the private company will simply call us and give us the number.
Sure. So if it's not breaking any rules and they're willing to share,
it's a private company, they can do whatever they want to and correct our mistake from a prior report. That
Oftentimes that
happens all the time. Sorry about that. But call us, tell us what the number is. We'll dutifully write it down.
Sure.
So that's the easy step.
Right.
Then we take the second step, which is what I did this morning when I drove past the parking lot.
Right.
Because over time, here's a private company, but we look at the number of people who show up for work there on a Monday or on a Tuesday. Yeah. And we know over time that goes up and down, and that people count probably reflects how they're doing.
Sure, right. So employee counts, things like that, and you get that kind of information from other sources as well. We don't have to drive past every single 10,000 parking lots that are in the oil patch.
No.
But that kind of primary research, I'll call that primary research, where we're out there gathering something that's germane to the issue at hand, which is how big they are.
Because what we found over the 25 years is that, me as an owner of a private company, I'm not going to tell you the secret revenue number of our company, but I'm very proud to say that we have 283 people working here.
Almost all the time, yeah.
So
no,
nice sun weekend.
That's a very good point. I mean, and there's all kinds of other things too. A lot of times companies will release information about their fleet count, like how many well service workover units we have, or how many coiled tubing units we've got.
Yep.
Those kind of things are germane to the discussion we're having when we're trying to see how big they are, because a lot of times the size of the asset fleet will tell you something about where they're standing in the industry, right? So,
and in this world of social media and LinkedIn, many times you'll see a company that's private, a directional driller, brag about how they just added their 20th follow me rig or something, set another record, and again, we write every one of those as a clue that tells you something that fits in category number 2.
Yeah. Now category number 1.
It's category number 3 because it goes easy to not quite so easy to the complex. And this is Halliburton, Schlumberger, NOV. Many of the companies fall in this very complex category.
Multi-divisional companies, multi-segment companies.
And probably public.
Right.
So they give you something.
So you've got a starting point to break down revenues.
All of our numbers have to add up to the number that they reported.
That's true. Yeah, right. Yeah.
So we've got that. I've got a denominator or a total.
Yeah, right. Gotcha.
And also in the drilling group, my assigned subcategories of the drilling group, it has to add up to that reported drilling.
I should take a break for this moment too, because in some categories we can sit there and say, based on how many wells we know are being drilled, or feet of hole being drilled, or things like that, we can come up with some estimates. Here's what we think the market size is, right? Total market. Doesn't help us by company, but it can say, oh, well, that should be a drill bit market of X millions because we have so many rigs working and so many feet of hole being. So that, again, gives us an anchor point or something to try and tie to.
Because if after doing all of our work, we come up with a number of $3 billion,
right?
But this external work we do says $2 billion.
You're right. Got to go back to
one of those is wrong.
Yeah.
But it gives us a chance to go back.
Sure. Right.
So in the complex companies, we start with their earnings, the quality, the quarterly earnings report, because you have to have that total number in each of the bigger categories. Yeah. Then we talk to all their competitors.
Okay. Right.
Because, if you're, we'll just use drill bits.
Yeah.
If you're a drill bit company, you're eyeballing your competitors, and you have this running tally in your head that says, I think we're doing better than they do. By the way, that's what everybody says. We're doing better than they are. Yeah. So therefore, every competitor has an opinion about the other competitor and is always happy to talk about that.
That reminds me as an aside. I think one of the other reasons we got to doing this is people would come to us, everybody in the business claiming that they were gaining market share. Yeah. And somebody had to be the bad guy and say, listen, those guys are gaining market share. These guys are losing market share. Everybody's enjoying better sales, but in terms of share,
that's right. Your revenues are up, but you're losing 5% market share.
Benchmarking is clearly a driver for the interest and need for this kind of information. So that's one, as an aside.
It is. How many times have we gotten that call over 25 years? We put out the OMR. Yeah. The phone rings the following day from the CFO. And he says, well. Yeah, you got our number right, but there's no way you got our competitor's number right. And then about an hour later, the competitor will call and say, well, you got ours right, but there's no way that you got our competitor right. Yeah. Those I'm
like marital counseling, as it were, with separate sessions or something. So we talk to the competitors. Yeah.
we talk up and down the supply chain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, and by supply chain, we mean, let's keep using drill bits as a.
Sure.
You talk to the insert manufacturer. You talk to the cobalt supplier.
Right.
You talk to the folks who are providing the CNC machines that are going to be machining things.
None of this gives you the exact answer, but hopefully it keeps you from going off the rails when it comes to, up, down, bigger or little, or things like that, right?
Well, it helps you identify. Several years ago, there was a small drill bit company, just use drill bits, where Altera, under a different name, it's a prior name, was kind of a small player. But it got refocused. It got different management, different ownership, and that company did fantastically. Well, you hear about it because now the insert manufacturers are saying, you need to go pay attention to Altera. They're doing great. And sure enough, they did great.
Yeah.
So you got to talk to the supply chain people.
An interesting point is the lack of input from customers.
Yeah.
And
have I said customer?
We
in
haven't
this
said
yet?
customers yet. And again, in the old days, we could do surveys and get some sense, if you did enough surveys, about market share from it, and if you aggregated answers and things like that. But these days, that's hardly a useful exercise, I think, because for one thing, there's so little willingness to share information on the part of an end user as to who they're doing business with. So that's just not as fruitful a way of gathering that kind of information as you might hope, or it certainly is the way it used to be.
Yeah, it just does. That whole world changed. What was it, 15 years ago, when this issue of material non-public really reared its ugly head.
Yeah.
And now, if you're a Chevron drilling engineer and you're responsible for West Texas, and you've been taught what you can say and what you can't say, and you're frozen. If I tell this market research guy in Tulsa, Oklahoma, that I'm using, Latshaw drilling and I'm using a Smith bit and I'm using Halliburton mud, is that material non-public information? Yeah. So I'm not going to say anything.
Right. Yeah. Some of that has been a function of financial regulations. Other thing is sad, but associated with some of the disasters the industry had. Macondo, for example, made all these guys very, very leery about. Well, who are you? You're an outside outfit. Who are you? Where's this information going to be used? And so we've just, gone around and developed other ways to try and, track.
Because we do get it.
It's absolutely right.
From the drilling engineer, the frac engineer. It just, and it's probably a little more reliable.
Yeah. So Dave and Missy put together a huge multivariate equation that handles multiple companies and multiple segments and
got a bunch of
solves for each at once.
It has some unknowns, but ultimately what we do is we'll write our number down.
Yeah, sure.
We've been using drill bits. Let's keep with drill bits.
Yeah, right.
We write our drill bit number down for Schlumberger Smith organization, for example, and we'll send it to Schlumberger's drill bit people, and we won't say, well. We never ask, and they never offer it. And I'm using Schlumberger just because they're big and they're in everything.
Yeah, right.
But
Easy.
We do not ask them to write down their number.
Sure, right.
We just simply say, here's what we're fixing to say about you. Here's what we've said about you.
Yeah.
Do you flinch when we
do right. Yeah. Well, they'll get often asked about their numbers or a segment or what's going on in a segment because other people will see, some financial types will see our numbers and then begin to say, I see this or that. So we'll get some feedback. There's a certain amount of dialogue that sort of explains where we might have
maybe a little high, maybe a little low. Right.
Because again, we're doing this globally. So you've got to balance, and for some of these markets that are balanced between international and domestic, there's different trends going on. Some are up, some are down at different rates. There's a lot of factors there to go in. We hopefully will keep all of that in mind as this exercise go through. And then one of the things we've done differently over all these years is we're now tracking this on a quarterly basis, right?
Yes.
And we've just been doing it annual exercises back in the good old days. But
back when I ran it, I did it every year. But now that David and Missy do it,
there's four of you.
We flogged them. There is a fourth step, and that is that because what we do is not accounting.
Yes.
Accounting,
Right.
you have to do things a certain way,
Yeah.
and then lock it in time.
Right, sure.
Lock it in place.
Yeah.
So you've closed the year on 2019. We don't do accounting.
Yes,
We're
right.
making an estimate of revenues.
Right.
And so if 2 years later we get a really good piece of information
Yeah.
about 2 years prior,
Sure. Then,
and we look at what we said and say, we need to adjust history.
or how about this? Company A by Companies B, right? What do you do there?
Right.
Yeah.
By the way, so this is what we do.
Right, sure.
If Company A buys Company B, we take all of Company B
Yeah.
and we fold it into Company A. Company B disappears in history.
Right. So it's
And
as if Company A had owned them forever and a day.
forever.
Yeah. Not just from this day forward. Yeah.
We call it, and I'm trying to get the world to adopt this, pro forma backcasting.
Yeah, we're a one man in a battle. Good luck with all that. Yeah.
So that's what we do.
Yeah, sure.
We've built a pretty good following. We have a loyal client base all over the planet. Right. The report's coming out in a month. If you want to learn more about it, it's on the website. And
if you got an idea for step 5, call us up. We'll be listening.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Anyway, Anyway, thanks for listening to the Drill Down. I'm Richard Spears.
And I'm John Spears.